Hey, Richard,
Yeah.
you got somebody asking to borrow a pen back here.
Yeah, I know, we gave away so many pins this morning, this was really amazing. Okay, ask it real. Well, this is one of the little thing I wanted to go through some of this stuff here. If I can get this thing to respond to my clicker. All right, now, I don't know, you may have heard of people doing this. I get these email requests of people saying, I went to this shop and I had this kind of problem and I paid them $500 and whenever I got it back, it still wasn't right. And I went to that shop and I paid them $200 and I got it back and it still wasn't right. And I went to that shop and I paid them another $300, different shops. They go from one shop to the other. They're thinking, well, I didn't like the service I got at this shop, so I'll go to a different shop. Maybe they can find it and I'll pay them to fix it. Well, they really should have gone back to the same shop and tried to get them to make it good. Now, the problem is, people sometimes will go back to the shop and they get charged a bunch more money. Now, here's one right here. You guys give me a notion here of what you think might be wrong with this one. This guy sent me an email, and basically through my website, and he says, I have a Lincoln, 2000 Lincoln LSV. Every time I back up the past few months and start forward, there's a slipping of the tire. If there's any slipping of the tire, such as snow or gravel, a message appears to check traction control. Then the radio goes off, the windows won't work, and finally the car dies. Now I left his misspelling error in there. And finally the car dies. I can have it jumped off and it will be fine until the next time this scenario happens. Can I turn off the traction control or will this cause any damage?
I got a question that's something similar.
All right.
My dad's driving a GMC.
Yep.
That the same thing's happening.
Yep.
And it's throwing a code saying the wheel or the throttle position sensor is going bad or something.
Well, it depends on what the strategy is for that particular vehicle. Some of them actually limit the throttle so that it keeps you from giving it so much gas. So you may be running into a problem with that. Now you got it. Is it got electronic throttle control?
Yeah.
It's
like a really new.
You got something in that.
But when it does it, the traction control starts kicking.
The traction control is part of that deal.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
It loses like cause power.
Yeah. Somebody give me an idea on this one here, though. Anybody got any idea? This is the kind of stuff that you get when you're going to those big schools like I got. I didn't get this from the big school I just went to up there. But this is the kind of stuff you get when you go up there. What they're wanting is for everybody in here somebody to weigh in on this and all that. What did somebody shoot me a wild guess about it? What is it?
PCM.
He said PCM.
Line jump to something so big, so quick.
We just spent $900. We put a PCM on it. It didn't fix it. Now what?
What if it's a wheel speed sensor?
Huh?
What if it's a wheel speed sensor?
What's that going to do to my windows and my radio?
Just a guess. What if it's like when the wheel slips, it's losing a ground or something?
Well, you're thinking kind of in the right direction, but that's not what it was.
On
Now
that-
this is, huh?
On that car, is everything run by the control unit in the radio?
No. Now that's a good question too, because like on some of the Volkswagens, you can't talk to any module on the car if you pull the radio out. And if you put an aftermarket radio in there on some of them Volkswagens, it'll burn the scan tool up. You know, welcome to the wonderful world of Volkswagen.
Would it be a connection to the fuse box?
I said, the traction control is not causing that. Believe it or not, you have a bad ignition coil. Somebody just has to find out which one it is. You have several coils. Let me know what happens. His follow-up. I have replaced 2 ignition coils, and my mechanic told me I would need to replace the other soon. He was not able to detect the problem with this. Can't wait to tell him. I bet this has been a problem all along.
Ignition coils cause the
Ignition
windows
coils
not
cause
to
it.
work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ford it do all kind of crazy.
Yep.
That's why I won't buy a Ford.
Yep.
That's why.
Enjoy your Volkswagen, buddy. All right.
Give me a GMC actually.
All right. I got a 98 Dodge Caravan. I bought it about a month ago. It has just over 100,000 miles on it. It was running fine for a couple of weeks. Transmission leaked the red oil, so the garage where I bought the car from repaired the transmission. Now, 2 weeks down the road, I find sometimes my gears will slip. If I put it in reverse, sometimes it doesn't catch and the engine just revs when I'm driving. Sometimes the gear will go to neutral and the car doesn't go forward. I had to stop and put the gear in place. Sometimes it just takes a while before it catches. In reverse, you had to put the car in drive and then back in reverse before it would work. took his car back to the garage. Hope you don't mind explaining to me what are the possible problems when the gears act like that. And he wants an explanation from an independent expert rather than listening to the crap the garage sometimes tries to pull over on me.
It's got delayed engagement.
Yeah, that's delayed engagement, you're using the right term, but what would you tell him?
Either there's
They
too
coulda
much
got-
fluid or you're leaking.
well-
Wait a minute, somebody said something, what?
Too much fluid.
You either got too much fluid or it's leaking and it's not enough fluid in it.
Or it could have been, they had like, the fluid had never been changed in it, and it had a tarnish on the valves. And once they put that new fluid in it broke it loose. And
That's possible, sometimes that happens, and that's not a bad thing there.
Probably burn up the gears and the clutch.
What we're gonna do though, what we're looking for, guys, is the simplest thing first, and he was close, well, he was the closest one. This is what I told him. I said, that sounds like the transmission's low on fluid, especially if it drops into neutral when you're going around a curve and doesn't wanna engage first thing in the morning. Check the transmission fluid with the engine warm and running, and let me know what happens. Now, this is his fault, right here. I took the car back to the garage and they kept it for half a day and told me it cost $500 to fix it. I told them I'd think about it, took the car to another place, asked them to check the fluid, they said it was low, filled it up, doesn't have the problem anymore. You got that? And he said, you're a genius because those guys at the garage were talking about taking the whole transmission down, but actually pinpoint the problem from just my description of the symptoms. You know? What we need to do sometimes is just think about it and do the quick and easy before we dive in all the way. You see? I mean, and I think what probably happened at that one garage was that they didn't take the guy's problem seriously enough to actually go out there and put their hands on it. They just give him a price. There is a transmission shop around here that I know of that if they don't want the job, they will sell you, they'll give you a price that's so high that they know you won't hire them. And I've seen them do that more than once.
Or tell you that they need a transmission because
Is
they
that old guy up?
Huh?
Is it that old guy up?
I have a 94 Ranger, 4-wheel drive with a 3-liter. A few months ago, it was running rough. Took it to a shop, they replaced the number 2 injector, it fixed the problem of running rough. But since then, it's had a problem starting. In the morning, it starts right up. When I drive for a while, if I turn it off, it'll start right up again. But if I let it sit for about an hour to 5 hours, I have to crank it a couple of times to get it to start. And when it starts, it runs rough for a couple of seconds, and you can sometimes smell gas like it's flooded. Took it back to the same mechanic, replaced the fuel pressure regulator, fuel pump relay, ECC relay, checked the reset timing and no avail. He says he has no idea. He knew.
Alright, what is it? I wouldn't.
Said the O-ring on the injector.
Huh?
The O-ring on the injector.
could be a leak in it, Jack.
Well, I think Jonathan's probably hit the nail on the head this time. How do you find that one?
You pull the spark plugs after it's been set and see which spark plug
That's
works.
exactly what I told him. Get to the point where the get it to where it's doing it. Shut it off while it's running bad. Pull the spark plug. The city wet one will have a dripping injector. If you remove the injectors, that same injector will have a very clean tip. The non-leaking injectors will have dirty tips. Okay? This is really a terrific follow-up. Thanks, works great now, Tom. He didn't tell me nothing. You know what I'm saying? I wanted more information than that. Well, you gotta appreciate his detailed response, you know? All right, so today people take their business elsewhere if they don't like the merchandise or the service. That's basically what I do, and it do you, and all that. And when I buy a car, I like to buy one that's tried and true, that's got all the bugs worked out of it. Not the latest and greatest or the newest one or something like that. All right, so in other words, I usually buy the last generation of whatever I buy. The Jeep Cherokee that I used to drive, I bought the last one that they made like that. The Taurus that I'm driving today was the last one they made like that. The 85 Taurus I drove was the last one they made like that. The F-150 I've got, the engine and the transmission package in that one has been around since 1980. Got me? I mean, you buy the one that's smart. Also, you buy the one that you know well enough to where you can fix it if something breaks down. Don't buy one that every time it breaks down, it's a learning experience. Like the red one that I'm thinking about, right? Okay, now then. Rather than giving the first shop a chance to straighten things out, they just try another shop. And I say, why don't you take it back to the first shop and have them make good on their repair instead of bouncing from one shop to another? Well, some of them will tell me they've gone back to the first shop only to be told that more money needs to be spent to fix the same problem. And that kind of thing is frustrating, you know, in word. So who wouldn't lose confidence in a shop that pulls that kind of stunt? You know, I told you about some of these people, and I'll tell you what people will also do. People will do whatever they have to keep their car going, and they'll get a workaround. There was this one lady I heard about, you were here Click and Clack. The Tappet Brothers, you ever heard those guys on the radio? They actually have a call-in hotline where people will call in and they'll talk to them about their cars. And this lady had, I think it was a Volvo, and she says, I've noticed that sometimes when I go to start my car, I turn the key and it won't start. But if I'll take, you know, the key's in the console on that one, and she said, but if I take a little water and pour in there, it'll start. And so what I do is I keep a little water in my console all the time so I can always have something to pour in there when it won't start. Well, that was a workaround. You know, she figured out her own workaround and all this. And some other people, and you never notice how some people, whenever they're starting their lawnmower, they're the only person that knows how to start it. Anybody else can try to start that lawnmower and they can't get it to start. Tongue hangs out like a tie because you're pulling the thing. Okay, so, but I mean, if they say, well, if you do the choke, if you pull it 2 times and you do that and you bring the choke halfway, then you pull it the rest of the way and you fire it and you bring it back, it'll fire up. I mean, they know exactly what to do because they've done it. There was another guy that says, I was backing out of my driveway and I got onto some snow and I kind of lost it and I slid down the hill, and whenever I went against the wall down there on each side of the driveway, it bent my exhaust pipe back up there close to the tire, and it looks really stupid, but I figured I would have it fixed later. But I've noticed that since my exhaust is bent like that, my car runs better than it ever has and gets better gas mileage. Do I need to fix this? I mean, I can't explain that, but the funny thing about it is, he was asking, is this something that I need to work on since it now runs better since it was bent? I mean, you know, this stuff is not, one size doesn't fit all, and everything is not as simple as you think it be. Now, from the shop owner, technician's perspective, it seems like the deck is stacked against us sometimes if the vehicle has been poorly maintained and is very old. In other words, if they haven't looked after it, they want you to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
I
You
had
heard,
that problem.
you've had that problem, haven't you?
And
Yeah.
Matt, we had this 85 Chevrolet coming out.
Yeah.
And it's coming in there because it's popping back through the breather and like skipping. Well, I went and drove it, come back, I done looked over everything, and I come back and I pulled the breather off to see what was going on, maybe, you know, a plug wire or something bad. Well, the radiator hose on the back of the block was spraying water up under the distributor, and that was a skipping problem. Well, the popping back through the breather, I found out it's low fuel pressure.
Yeah. And that was is an 85 model. Yeah. One of those did that. Now I'll tell you something else. You know the old TBI throttle body Chevrolets?
The ones that sitting there spraying.
Yeah.
in it, that's what it's gonna
Yeah, that's what I was thinking you were talking about. Do you know how much the fuel pressure is supposed to be on one of those?
Yeah, 19 to 12 pounds.
Yeah, 12 to 19 pounds. 19 top, 12. Yeah, 12 to 19. He went backwards, but basically 12 to 19 pounds is what it is. And you can have one of those that's got a stopped up fuel filter, and you'd swear the catalytic converter was stopped up on it.
Well, this one's got
Boo. I mean, it'll run like that, but all you gotta do is change the fuel filter, and it'll, you know, come back alive.
this one's got 10 pounds idling, and once you put it under load, it drops down to 4.
Yeah, and that's where you're backfiring out, and you get back, that's a lean backfire. Whenever it gets really lean, pop back out. Now, we'll tell you this though, think about this and be careful on those trucks, because some of those, when the spark plugs are foul, they'll backfire out the intake, and you'd swear they're out of time or something when there's nothing wrong. You ever seen them do that? Boom! I mean, fire will come out there this far, you know, to scare the daylights out of you. Don't have your head over it. You know, I mean, how many times, if you ever worked on a carburetor before and it does a lean backfire, you get singed, and it singes your hair and you smell it for days. Okay.
This one's like when it only backfires to the carburetor in the morning time.
Yeah.
Like when you
Yep. Well, that's what it
barely
needs to
crown
do.
the throttle, like just barely easing on the gas, it goes whoop whoop, and then it goes.
Yep, that needs just a little bit of lean backfire because it needs more. Well, I got a ticket one time on a mid-80s Ford pickup that barely had the hood open since it was new. They just been driving this thing, an old pickup truck. It was a rough idle stalling issue, and I found a clogged idle air control passages, nasty throttle body, filthy gasoline-laced engine oil. The longer you run your oil without changing it, the more gas gets in it, right? From thousands of miles of misfiring spark plug that had almost melted completely away, a plugged fuel filter, late ignition timing, TP sensor with a ragged signal, and a bunch of vacuum leaks. We made an estimate. You know, how this guy wound up at the Ford dealer, I don't know. You know what I mean? If you're gonna have one that's raggedy and old like that to take it to the Ford dealer, our labor rates were high over there compared to regular shop. Well, we created an estimate, received the go-ahead, made the repairs, and test drove the truck. And it ran surprisingly well, just like it ought to be. Well, a week later, he comes back and says, my truck still ain't fixed. And I discovered that the lift pump in the fuel tank, it's got a little pump, kind of like a windshield washer pump on those in the gas tank, and it feeds the one on the frame. It's like our Bronco out here. And if that one in the gas tank quits running, the one on the frame may or may not get its prime, and it may run just fine sometimes and crappy other times. There was one that had been to the Lincoln dealership, and they didn't really know what pocket to put it in. And it was a Ranger. And I said, I wonder if that pump in the tank is running, just the way he was describing it. And I got into there and told him to put my ear against the gas tank, lay it in the parking lot, and he turned it on, and that pump was just as quiet. So we put a pump in the tank and took care of it. Anyway, about half the time, that fuel tank pump was, the fuel tank pump was about half the time working. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. And when the fuel tank was low on gas, the pressure pump might or might not begin to lose its prime while the truck was actually being driven. Now the pressure pump's well on the frame. When the pressure pump loses its prime, the truck doesn't run well. Now everything else that we did, he needed. In other words, we didn't sell him anything he didn't need. The truck was falling apart. I mean, it needed everything that we did. But he came back with this smug look on his face, said, you owe me another repair, And sometimes people will do that. I had a guy one time, back in the mid-'80s, we also had problems with, they were putting olefins in the gasoline with the idea that they were going to clean the injectors with the little black particles of olefin. If you put some gasoline back then in one of these Hardee's drink cups, you could let it settle out and you'd see little black specks in the bottom of it. That was supposed to stay suspended in the gasoline because it mixed really well with octane, and it was supposed to go blasting through those injectors and keep them clean and go on through there and be eliminated. Well, the problem was when the injectors were, would close, those olefins would get trapped and they'd get baked on and they wouldn't leave, and also they were piling up on the intake valves. And they were causing the engines to run lean. Eventually we wound up getting a procedure for using walnut holes going in through the injector holes with a vacuum attachment to clean those valves. But before Ford and everybody else figured out what was going on, then we were having issues with this one, this one security guard had a Ranger, and he would drive it 200 miles, shut it off, 200 yards, shut it off, drive it 200 yards, shut it off. And he got so much crud on those valves that you couldn't, and I didn't know that's what was wrong with it at the time. We were all scratching our heads trying to figure out what to do with it without spending lots of warranty money. And he sold the truck. And one of the things I had done was I put a one-way vacuum valve or a vacuum restrictor in the line going to the fuel pressure regulator, and that seemed to help it a little bit. But we eventually wound up with, we're going to clean that stuff. Anyway, there was this other guy that bought the truck. Only I didn't recognize the truck when it first came to me. He came in and he says, he was slipped. He comes in and he says, I want a tune-up on my truck. Well, what's a tune-up? You clean the throttle body, you put spark plugs in there, you set the time, and if it's got a distributor and blah, blah, blah. So I pulled it in there, did all of that hogwash, drove it, seemed like it was okay. It was warm the whole time. I mean, it never did get cold. He didn't say anything about a cold running problem. He came back the next day. This is the guy that worked with my brother. He came back the next day and he says, whoop, now my truck's not running right when it's cold. See, he never mentioned that before. And I said, wait a minute. I opened the hood and I looked at it, and as I looked around, I happened to look back there and see that vacuum restrictor, and I looked at the color of the truck, and I said, I know this truck. Did you buy this truck from this guy? And I said the guy's name, and he turned kind of red, and he says, yeah. I said, we worked on this truck for this same problem you're complaining about now before you bought it from him. You knew about this when you brought it in here, didn't you? When you brought it in here trying to get into us for a tune-up, wanting us to work on your truck and straighten it out. And he turned red in the face and drove off, and we never saw him again. See, the jig was up because but he was trying to something slick. I'm going to get into you a little bit. Okay, now then, I hadn't sold this guy anything he didn't need, and that's what I was talking about. So he asked me, if this thing going to fix my truck now, well, what are you going to tell him? This 99 Expedition we're going to talk about now had a leaking heater core. It was 2 years ago by another shop. Now it's leaking again. This is what you got to do to get the heater core out of a 99 Expedition. A 2002 is not so hard because you can get in there and get it out without pulling the dash. First thing the guy noticed when he removed the panel and accessed the blend door and the heater core was that the blend door was installed upside down. Whoever did the work before put the blend door in upside down. You can see if you looked really close, you can see rust down there where the leak was. And so look at, you remember the restrictor I told you about that's in some of these heater cores? There's one right there. We didn't notice how the lines were connected when we pulled it apart. That orifice should be connected to the hose coming from the water pump, and if it had been connected backwards, the pressure on a heater core would have been harder to contain because of the restriction. We made sure reassembly. Well, a cooling system with an off-balance pH, which would be acid or alkaline, creates electrolysis. It not only attacks the engine block, but also the heater core. Electrolysis melts the metal away a little at a time. We need to go the extra mile. It never should need another heater core because of something we didn't do. Well, this is a soft skill sidebar. The owner of a shop called me to ask if he had anybody he could use. He says, every technician I've hired for the past 2 years disappointed me. They start out strong, but after a month or two, just about every one of them turns lazy, unprofitable, and undependable. Now, he was not paying these guys commission, he was paying them salary. In other words, he was just paying them by the hour for the amount of time they were there. And they started getting lazy for some reason. He explained he had to turn work away because he didn't have sufficient help. So I said the guy that I'm talking about was working on this one. He couldn't be happier with that fellow's energy, enthusiasm, work ethic, so on and so forth. Well, anyway, this looks kind of like what we've been doing on the Ranger. Now, we didn't have a problem with flow here, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a bunch of crud in this thing that's going to go into the new heater core. So we hooked these hoses up. I wanted to make sure that we knew which way the coolant was going before we hooked those hoses back up to the heater core. And, you know, sometimes you can just track it, but in this case, I said I wanted to also see what the coolant looked like, and it was filthy. And there was enough of this stuff to paint a parking lot. If somebody changes their coolant every time the manufacturer says they're supposed to and they treat the car right, you're not typically going to have trouble like this. All right, so here you go. Here's your test, guys. What's an important step that should be taken before a refrigerant recycler is connected to a vehicle's air conditioning system? Don't say it out loud, just answer your question. A, the car must be allowed to cool. B, a refrigerant identifier must be used to determine if the system is charged with a blend. C, some refrigerant must be checked for flammability using a propane torch. And D, a leak check must be performed. It's one of those 4 answers. Answer it quietly. Moving on. What should be done with refrigerant blends? A, they should be recovered with a separate machine dedicated to blends. B, they should be exhausted to the atmosphere. C, they should be recovered with an R12 compatible equipment, or none of the above. Answer the question and move on. Technician A says pressure switches, I messed that one up, are typically used to cycle the compressor and or the cooling fan. Technician B says a bad pressure switch might prevent the compressor from engaging. Who's right about that? A, B, both, or neither? A test light is connected between ground and the trigger side of a negatively fired, normally open relay coil. What should happen? Now, where the arrow is where you're connecting your test light. The relay is still in place, and you can actually get in there and touch the terminal with the relay still plugged in. Whenever I touch my test light, between ground and that point right there, what should happen? The relay should close, burn up, open, or none of the above. What is the purpose of this diode? Now there's only 3 possible answers on this one. A, it acts as a fuse. B, it shuts down the compressor. C, it prevents an inductive spike. Imagine what this would be like if this was your final exam. These were all the questions you were going to get. The evaporator thermistor does what? A, prevents excessive high pressure. B, prevents excessive moisture buildup on the condenser. C, signals the controller concerning evap temp to cycle the compressor to prevent evaporator icing. Or D, reads evaporator pressure. Sending a ground signal through the wire from amplifier, pin 11, you hear the compressor cycle on. What does this mean? Now there's pin 11 there where the arrow's being drawn. The compressor cycle's on. Yeah, I know that schematic's not that great, but you should be able to figure it out. That's a geo tracker, by the way. 96.
If you put ground to that,
If you ground pin 11, what happens? That's really a poorly written question. I guess what I probably should have said is you get power through it. I think when I was typing that in a hurry this morning, my wife called me in there to go, get a spider or something. And I meant to put power. Change where it says ground to power instead of that. I don't know why I said ground there. That was bad. That was an epic fail on that question for me. Okay. If I put power through there, what happens? Hey, the clutch field one is operative, the clutch is complete from the amplifier to the relay is good. All about. You hear it cyclone. You put power to it and it goes boom. Why would the AC switch have a ground wire along with power and switch signal circuits? A, to prevent high voltage spikes. B, to provide a ground path for the indicator LED in the switch. C, to provide a ground for the signal. Or D, to ground the relay. Now, I might tell you, this one here goes to pin 11. This one here goes to ground. This one here comes from power. What should this test lap do with the AC and vehicle turned off? AC in the vehicle are turned off. In other words, you've switched off the key and you don't have the AC turned on. You're hooking a test light there where the smiley face is. What should you see there? You'll have to write that in out next to that last question. All right. Now we'll have to let my YouTube friends send me answers to their answers to the questions and see how they did on it too.
Was that 9